What's the price you pay when you run from yourself? Every single day, that hidden part of you, that shadow, grows stronger in the dark. Have you ever wondered why some people achieve extraordinary results while others stay stuck in mediocrity? The difference isn't talent. It isn't opportunity. It isn't luck. The difference is whether they've had the courage to face what most people spend their entire lives running from. You see, most people live in a carefully constructed illusion. They show the world their polished exterior while burying the parts they don't want to acknowledge. But those buried parts, those shadows, they don't disappear. They operate behind the scenes, sabotaging your relationships, your career, your health, and everything else you value. When was the last time you looked honestly at the parts of yourself you'd rather not admit exist? When was the last time you acknowledged your jealousy, your rage, your greed, your fear? These aren't comfortable questions, are they? But your discomfort is the first sign you're approaching something valuable. I met a man, let's call him Robert, who built a successful business. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Beautiful family, beautiful home, community respect. But Robert was living a divided life. The parts of himself he rejected, his insecurities, his need for approval, his fear of failure, they didn't cease to exist just because he ignored them. They operated in the background, pushing him to work punishing hours, to sacrifice his health, to distance himself from his family. I've accomplished everything I set out to do, he told me, but I feel hollow inside. That's what happens when you live at odds with your shadow. You might achieve external success, but the internal price becomes unbearable. Ask yourself this question and answer honestly. What parts of yourself have you been denying? What aspects of your character have you labeled unacceptable? The greatest tragedy isn't failing to reach your goals. The greatest tragedy is reaching them only to discover you've been climbing the wrong mountain. Personal responsibility begins with this recognition. You cannot transform what you refuse to acknowledge. The shadow parts of yourself, the anger, the jealousy, the selfishness, the fear, they don't go away when ignored. They go underground. They sabotage. They undermine. They destroy. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah came from humble beginnings. She worked hard, graduating at the top of her class, securing a prestigious position. But success didn't bring the fulfillment she expected. Instead, she felt like an imposter. The higher she climbed, the more intense her anxiety became. Why? Because Sarah never addressed her shadow, her deep-seated belief that she wasn't worthy of success. She avoided this uncomfortable truth, hoping achievement would make it disappear. But your shadow doesn't disappear with success. It often amplifies. Sarah's turning point came during a week-long retreat, where she finally confronted these hidden beliefs. She recognized how her unworthiness drove both her ambition and her misery. When she brought this shadow into the light, something remarkable happened. Her anxiety didn't disappear overnight, but she no longer felt controlled by it. She could observe it, understand it, work with it rather than against it. Now, I'm not suggesting that confronting your shadow is comfortable. It isn't. Truth rarely is. But comfort has never been the pathway to growth. Think about it this way. Everything in nature grows through resistance. The seed must push against the soil. The butterfly must struggle out of the chrysalis. The muscle must tear before it strengthens. Why would your character development follow different rules? When you avoid your shadow, you avoid the very resistance necessary for growth. What happens to your finances when you ignore the shadow of your spending habits? What happens to your health when you ignore the shadow of your self-destructive tendencies? What happens to your relationships when you ignore the shadow of your resentment, your neediness, your fear of intimacy? The results are predictable, aren't they? And they're devastating. I worked with a couple once, married 15 years, 2 children, who were on the brink of divorce. They'd grown distant, resentful. Communication had devolved into logistics and arguments. When I asked each of them to identify their contribution to the breakdown, both quickly listed their spouse's faults instead. Do you see what happened? Neither could acknowledge their own shadow, their role in the deterioration of the marriage. The husband couldn't admit his tendency to withdraw during conflict. The wife couldn't acknowledge her habit of criticism. Both were stuck pointing fingers, wondering why nothing improved. Their breakthrough came when they finally turned those fingers around. The husband admitted, "I run from difficult conversations. I always have." The wife confessed, "I use criticism as a weapon when I feel neglected." From that simple but profound shift in responsibility, they began rebuilding. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was transformative because they stopped ignoring what they'd spent years denying. Personal growth isn't complicated, but it is difficult. Most people know what they should do. The problem isn't knowledge, it's application. And application fails when we refuse to acknowledge the internal barriers we've constructed. Consider your own life. Where have you been stuck in the same pattern for years? Where do you keep encountering the same problems in different settings? Those recurring difficulties are often clues pointing to your shadow, the aspects of yourself you've disowned, the truths you've avoided. A wise person once said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly while expecting different results. Yet how many people do exactly that? They change jobs but bring the same attitudes. They change relationships but bring the same unresolved issues. They change locations but bring the same mindset. The shadow follows you wherever you go because it is you. Not all of you, but certainly part of you. And the more you deny it, the more power it has. Here's a fundamental principle. What you resist persists. What you embrace you can transform. I've seen this truth play out countless times with the people I've worked with over decades. Those who achieve lasting change in their careers, their relationships, their health, aren't necessarily more talented or more fortunate. They're simply more willing to face themselves honestly. They take personal responsibility not just for their actions but for their shadows. Let me give you a practical example. James was a talented executive whose career repeatedly stalled despite his obvious capabilities. After being passed over for promotion several times, he finally sought feedback. What he learned surprised him. While respected for his intelligence, he was perceived as arrogant and dismissive. James's initial reaction was defensive. "I'm just direct," he insisted. "I don't have time for hand-holding." But with some reflection he recognized the shadow at play. His deep insecurity masked his superiority. His fear of being exposed as inadequate drove him to diminish others. Once James acknowledged this pattern, he could begin changing it. He didn't transform overnight, but awareness created choice, where previously there had been only automatic reaction. Within a year, James not only received his promotion, but developed more meaningful connections with colleagues. By acknowledging his shadow, he diminished its power over him. Now you might be thinking, that's all well and good, but how do I identify my shadow? How do I recognize what I've spent years ignoring? Here's a simple but powerful approach. Pay attention to your triggers. What makes you disproportionately angry? What criticism cuts deepest? What compliments make you most uncomfortable? These emotional hotspots often point directly to your shadow. If criticism of your work triggers intense anger, perhaps your shadow contains doubt about your competence. If other success makes you envious beyond reason, perhaps your shadow holds beliefs about your unworthiness. If compliments about your appearance make you squirm, perhaps your shadow contains unresolved shame. Your emotional reactions are messengers. Most people shoot the messenger. The wise person listens to the message. Another avenue to your shadow. Notice your judgments of others. The qualities that irritate you most in other people often reflect disowned aspects of yourself. Jung called this projection, the unconscious tendency to see in others what we cannot accept in ourselves. When you find yourself harshly judging someone, ask yourself, is there any way, however small, that I also express this quality? The answer might surprise you, and it might lead you straight to your shadow. A woman in one of my seminars once complained bitterly about her coworker's constant need for validation. "She's so insecure," the woman said, "always fishing for compliments." When asked whether she ever sought validation, she immediately denied it. But later that day she had an insight. While she didn't ask directly for praise, she worked excessive hours partially to earn approval. Her judgment of her coworker revealed her own disowned need for validation. This recognition didn't make her less effective. It made her more effective because she stopped wasting energy, denying an aspect of herself. She could now meet that need consciously rather than letting it drive her unconsciously. The shadow isn't your enemy. Ignoring it is. The shadow contains not just your unacknowledged weaknesses, but also your unrealized strengths. Many people disown not only their negative qualities, but also their power, their creativity, their passion. I once worked with an accountant who secretly dreamed of writing fiction. He'd buried this creative impulse so deeply that it emerged only as criticism of impractical dreamers. By acknowledging this shadow, this disowned creativity, he didn't abandon his successful career. Instead, he integrated writing into his life, becoming more fulfilled and surprisingly more effective in his accounting practice, because he no longer resented it as his creativity's prison. Your shadow contains multitudes. It holds your unacknowledged weaknesses and wounds. Yes, but it also contains your unlived life, the paths not taken, the dreams abandoned, the capabilities undeveloped. When you avoid your shadow, you avoid not just pain but possibility. Consider this principle. The extent of your impact is directly proportional to the extent of your self-knowledge. You cannot lead others if you cannot lead yourself, and you cannot lead yourself if you're unwilling to explore your own depths. The most ineffective people I've encountered in business and in life share this quality. They lack self-awareness. They're blind to their own patterns. They blame circumstances, other people, bad luck, anything but their own choices and behaviors. The most effective people, by contrast, demonstrate remarkable self-knowledge. They understand their triggers and tendencies. They recognize their shadows, and this awareness gives them choices where others have only reactions. Look at any area where you're struggling. I guarantee there's a shadow element you're avoiding. If your business is failing, perhaps you're avoiding the shadow of your fear of success, your discomfort with wealth, or your resistance to necessary confrontation. If your marriage is failing, perhaps you're avoiding the shadow of your fear of intimacy, your unresolved past wounds, or your unrealistic expectations. Whatever you refuse to face limits your life. Whatever you're willing to face, you can transform. This isn't just philosophical theory. This is practical truth with measurable consequences. Studies consistently show that self-aware leaders outperform their peers. Marriages improve when both partners take responsibility for their contributions to problems. Addictions are overcome when people stop denying and start acknowledging. Health improves when patients address not just symptoms but underlying behaviors. In every domain, acknowledgement precedes change. You cannot transform what you will not face. So let me ask you directly, what have you been avoiding? What truth about yourself have you been unwilling to admit? What pattern keeps repeating in your life, despite your best efforts to break it? The answer to these questions leads straight to your shadow, and your willingness to explore that shadow might be the most important determinant of your future success and fulfillment. But here's what most personal development approaches miss. Shadow work isn't just about identifying weaknesses to eliminate. It's about wholeness, integration, becoming more fully yourself by reclaiming the parts you've disowned. The goal isn't to perfect yourself. The goal is to complete yourself. And completion requires acknowledgement of everything. The good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly. Think about relationships for a moment. Why do so many fail? One key reason. People enter relationships showing only their polished exterior, while hiding their shadow. Then they're shocked and dismayed when reality eventually emerges. The strongest relationships aren't between perfect people. They're between whole people, individuals who have done the work of acknowledging and integrating their shadows, who can say, "This is who I am, all of me, and I'm still worthy of connection." The same principle applies to your relationship with yourself. You cannot truly accept yourself while rejecting significant aspects of who you are. And without self-acceptance, genuine self-acceptance based on knowledge rather than denial, sustainable success remains elusive. Personal responsibility begins with this recognition. You cannot transform what you refuse to acknowledge. The shadow parts of yourself, the anger, the jealousy, the selfishness, the fear, they don't go away when ignored. They go underground. They sabotage. They undermine. They destroy. Now let's examine the patterns these shadows create. Life operates according to predictable laws. Just as gravity doesn't care whether you believe in it before pulling you toward the earth, the patterns of self-sabotage function, whether you recognize them or not. The first pattern, what you resist persists, and what you consistently avoid eventually becomes unavoidable. Think about the areas of your life where you've made the least progress despite your best efforts. I guarantee you'll find a shadow lurking there, an aspect of yourself you've deemed unacceptable, and therefore pushed into darkness where it operates beyond your control. For some, it's the shadow of unworthiness driving relentless achievement that never satisfies. For others, it's the shadow of fear fostering procrastination and mediocrity. For many, it's the shadow of rage or resentment poisoning relationships that should nourish. These patterns repeat with mathematical precision. The same problems, the same conflicts, the same disappointments, cycling through different circumstances, but with identical emotional cores. Have you noticed this in your own life? The same relationship issues with different partners, the same workplace tensions with different colleagues, the same financial struggles in different decades. This isn't coincidence, it's consequence. It's the inevitable result of ignoring your shadow. I know a man who's been divorced 3 times. After each marriage, he'd say, "I just picked the wrong person." But after the 3rd divorce, he finally asked himself a different question. What's the common denominator in all these failed relationships? The answer, of course, was him. Specifically, it was his unacknowledged shadow, his fear of abandonment that manifested as controlling behavior, his insecurity that emerged as jealousy, his unresolved childhood wounds that he expected his partners to heal. Only when he confronted these shadows, only when he stopped blaming his ex-wives and started examining his own patterns, could he break the cycle. Today, he's in a healthy marriage, not because he found the right person, but because he became a more integrated person. That's the power of pattern recognition. When you see the repetition, you can interrupt it. When you identify the cycle, you can step out of it. But only if you're willing to look at the shadow driving it. The second pattern, your outer life reflects your inner reality. What's happening around you mirrors what's happening within you. Most people have this backward. They believe circumstances create feelings. They think external success produces internal fulfillment. They assume relationship problems stem from the other person's deficiencies. But successful people understand the truth. Your inner landscape creates your outer reality. Your beliefs shape your behaviors. Your unconscious patterns determine your conscious experiences. Look at your results in any area: finances, health, relationships, career. Those results didn't appear randomly. They emerged from thousands of small choices, and those choices emerged from your beliefs, many of which operate in your shadow. If your financial situation is chaotic despite your best efforts, examine your shadow relationship with money. Perhaps you unconsciously believe wealth is evil, that you don't deserve abundance, or that financial security leads to abandonment, because that's what you witnessed in childhood. If your health is suffering despite your knowledge of proper nutrition and exercise, examine your shadow relationship with self-care. Perhaps you unconsciously believe suffering is virtuous, that your needs don't matter, or that physical limitation provides safety from expectations. If your relationships consistently disappoint, examine your shadow expectations and attachments. Perhaps you unconsciously seek validation rather than connection, use people to fill inner voids, or push away intimacy to avoid vulnerability. Here's a fundamental truth most people miss. Your shadow doesn't just influence your life, it creates your life. The parts of yourself you've disowned are precisely the parts determining your destiny. This isn't mystical thinking, it's practical psychology. When you operate with divided consciousness, presenting one face to the world while suppressing significant aspects of yourself, you create divided results. Surface success coupled with underlying dissatisfaction, material achievement paired with emotional emptiness, professional advancement matched with personal stagnation. I see this pattern repeated endlessly among outwardly successful people. They've mastered the external game while neglecting the internal work. They've built impressive facades while their foundations crumble. They've accumulated possessions while losing themselves. The third pattern: what you judge in others reveals what you reject in yourself. Your harshest criticisms point directly to your deepest shadows. When something about another person triggers intense emotion in you, whether anger, disgust, or even excessive admiration, pay attention. That trigger often reveals a disowned aspect of yourself. If you find yourself unusually irritated by someone's arrogance, ask yourself where arrogance might live in your shadow. If you're consistently annoyed by someone's neediness, consider what needs you might be denying in yourself. If you're excessively impressed by someone's confidence, examine what confidence you might have rejected in your own character. This doesn't mean your perceptions are wrong. The arrogant person may indeed be arrogant, but your intense reaction reveals something about you, not just about them. I worked with an executive who complained constantly about her lazy team members. During our sessions, she realized that what she labeled laziness in others was often simply a different work style than her frenetic pace. More importantly, she recognized that her judgment of laziness stemmed from her shadow, her denied need for rest, her fear that slowing down meant weakness, her belief that her value came exclusively from productivity. When she acknowledged these shadow elements, something remarkable happened. Not only did her harsh judgment soften, but her effectiveness as a leader increased. She could now see her team members' strengths. Rather than focusing exclusively on how they differed from her, she could delegate more appropriately, because she understood different working styles. And perhaps most importantly, she could finally give herself permission to rest without self-condemnation. That's the paradox of shadow work. By acknowledging what you've deemed unacceptable in yourself, you become more accepting of others. By integrating your disowned parts, you become more whole and therefore more effective in every area of life. The fourth pattern. Your excuses reveal your priorities. What you consistently make time for, regardless of circumstances, shows what you truly value. Most people claim to value health, relationships, personal growth, and contribution, but their calendars tell a different story. Their bank statements reveal different priorities. Their daily habits demonstrate different values. This gap between stated values and actual behaviors often stems from shadow motivations, unconscious drivers that overpower conscious intentions. You say you value health, but consistently sacrifice sleep, proper nutrition, and exercise for work. Why? Perhaps your shadow contains the belief that your worth comes from achievement rather than existence. Perhaps it holds the fear that slowing down means falling behind. Perhaps it harbors the conviction that self-care is selfish. You say you value relationships, but consistently choose work, television, or other distractions over quality time with loved ones. Why? Perhaps your shadow contains the belief that emotional intimacy equals vulnerability equals pain. Perhaps it holds the fear that truly being seen means being rejected. Perhaps it harbors the childhood conclusion that people always leave, so investing deeply leads only to heartbreak. You say you value personal growth but consistently avoid challenges, feedback, and self-examination. Why? Perhaps your shadow contains the belief that you're fundamentally flawed, and growth would reveal this fatal defect. Perhaps it holds the fear that change means loss of identity. Perhaps it harbors the conviction that you're already good enough, and striving for improvement admits inadequacy. When you make excuses, when you say you're too busy, too tired, too stressed, too unprepared, you're rarely lying consciously. You believe your excuses, but often they're merely the surface justifications for deeper shadow patterns. The cure for excuse making isn't willpower, it's shadow integration. It's bringing to consciousness the unconscious forces driving your behavior. It's acknowledging the fears, beliefs, and unmet needs operating beneath your awareness. I worked with a talented writer who couldn't finish his novel despite decades of effort. His conscious excuse was always time. Once things settle down at work, after the kids are a bit older, when life is less chaotic. But during our work together, he confronted his shadow, his terror of completion, because completion meant evaluation, and evaluation risked rejection. His shadow also contained the belief that his worth came from potential rather than actualization. As long as the novel remained unfinished, it could be perfect in theory. Once completed, its flaws would be exposed. Only by acknowledging these shadow elements could he finally break his pattern of procrastination. He finished his novel not through better time management, but through better self-knowledge. He completed his work not by fighting his excuses, but by understanding the shadow forces creating them. The fifth pattern. Your greatest growth occurs precisely where you're most resistant. The very thing you're avoiding contains your next level of development. Most people seek growth in comfortable areas while avoiding the uncomfortable zones that contain their most important lessons. They read books they already agree with. They develop skills they're already good at. They engage with ideas that confirm their existing beliefs. But true transformation happens at the edges of your comfort. In the territories you've marked, do not enter in your mental map. Your resistance is a compass pointing toward your growth. The conversation you don't want to have, that's exactly the one you need to initiate. The emotion you don't want to feel, that's precisely the one you need to process. The truth you don't want to admit, that's absolutely the one you need to acknowledge. I worked with a business owner who avoided financial details, delegating them entirely to others. She claimed this was effective delegation, but it was actually avoidance. Her shadow contained shame about her numerical abilities and fear that confronting the details would reveal incompetence. When circumstances forced her to engage directly with her company's finances, she discovered not only that she was more capable than she believed, but that her unique perspective brought valuable insights her financial team had missed. Her area of greatest resistance contained her next level of leadership. What are you currently avoiding? What conversation, decision, emotion, or truth are you dancing around rather than confronting directly? That's where your shadow operates most powerfully. And that's where your greatest growth awaits. The sixth pattern: mediocrity comes from comfort seeking. Excellence comes from truth seeking. The quality of your life reflects your relationship with discomfort. Average people organize their lives around comfort. They choose the familiar over the beneficial. They prefer the easy lie to the difficult truth. They select immediate gratification over delayed fulfillment. Exceptional people organize their lives around growth. They choose the beneficial over the familiar. They prefer the difficult truth to the easy lie. They select delayed fulfillment over immediate gratification. The difference isn't willpower or virtue. It's shadow integration. When you've acknowledged and integrated your shadows, you're no longer controlled by unconscious fears and unmet needs. You can choose short-term discomfort for long-term benefit, because you're not frantically trying to soothe unacknowledged wounds. Most self-sabotage stems from comfort-seeking behaviors driven by shadow elements. You procrastinate because starting feels uncomfortable. You avoid difficult conversations because confrontation triggers anxiety. You abandon healthy habits because discipline initially feels restrictive. But here's what most people miss. Discomfort is not a signal to stop. Discomfort is often a signal to continue. Just as muscle growth requires the discomfort of resistance training, character development requires the discomfort of challenging your limitations. The mediocre mentality interprets discomfort as danger and retreats. The excellence mentality interprets discomfort as growth and advances. I've worked with countless individuals who transformed their results by transforming their relationship with discomfort. They didn't eliminate discomfort. They developed the capacity to function effectively despite it. They didn't avoid difficult emotions. They learned to act in alignment with their values regardless of emotional states. This capacity emerges from shadow integration. When you've acknowledged the parts of yourself you previously rejected, when you've brought your fears, insecurities, and unmet needs into conscious awareness, you're no longer controlled by them. You can feel fear without being paralyzed by it. You can experience insecurity without being defined by it. You can recognize unmet needs without being driven by them. That's the foundation of an extraordinary life, the ability to choose action aligned with values rather than reaction driven by shadows. The seventh pattern: transformation occurs through integration, not elimination. You become whole not by removing parts of yourself, but by reclaiming them. The conventional approach to personal development suggests identifying weaknesses and eliminating them. But this approach often deepens the division within. It strengthens the illusion that some aspects of your humanity are acceptable while others must be rejected. True transformation comes not from eliminating your shadows, but from integrating them, from acknowledging their existence and understanding their origins, from bringing compassionate awareness to the parts of yourself you've previously condemned. Integration means recognizing that your shadows developed for reasons. Your control issues emerged from childhood chaos. Your people-pleasing grew from conditional love. Your perfectionism developed as protection against criticism. Your ambition arose from early experiences of scarcity. These patterns served purposes. They helped you survive. They protected you when you lacked other resources. They allowed you to function in difficult circumstances. The problem isn't that these shadows exist. The problem is that they now operate unconsciously, creating patterns that no longer serve your adult needs and aspirations. What conversation have you been avoiding? What truth have you been unwilling to express? What feedback have you been hesitant to deliver or receive? That avoidance points directly to your shadow, and addressing that shadow might be the key to your next breakthrough. So how do we move from understanding to action? How do we translate shadow awareness into tangible results? Through disciplines, daily practices that gradually transform unconscious patterns into conscious choices. Discipline isn't punishment, it's liberation. It's the structured practice that frees you from unconscious compulsions. It's the consistent action that creates not just new habits but new possibilities. The first discipline: radical honesty with yourself. Set aside 10 minutes each day for self-examination without self-judgment. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding right now? What emotion am I unwilling to feel? What truth am I reluctant to acknowledge? Don't rush to answer. Sit with the questions. Notice your resistance. Observe where your mind wants to flee. That resistance reveals your shadow's location. I've worked with thousands of individuals over decades, and I've never seen sustainable transformation without this fundamental practice of self-honesty. You cannot change what you refuse to see. You cannot heal what you will not acknowledge. Most people spend their entire lives running from themselves. They fill every moment with noise, entertainment, work, or distraction. They fear that if they stop, they'll have to face what they've been avoiding, their dissatisfaction, their unmet needs, their disowned parts. But what they don't realize is that running consumes more energy than confronting. Avoidance costs more than acknowledgement. The shadow grows stronger in darkness and dissipates in light. Start with just 10 minutes daily. No phone, no television, no distractions. Just you and your thoughts, practicing the art of honest self-observation. You'll be amazed at what emerges when you create this space. Insights, revelations, connections you've missed while busy running. The second discipline, emotional literacy. Learn to identify, name, and experience your full range of emotions without being controlled by them. Most people have remarkably limited emotional vocabularies. They recognize perhaps 3 or 4 feeling states: good, bad, stressed, fine. This impoverished emotional language reflects and reinforces shadow suppression. Begin expanding your emotional awareness. Instead of "I feel bad," identify specifically, "I feel disappointed," or "I feel embarrassed," or "I feel resentful." Instead of "I'm stressed," clarify, "I'm anxious about this presentation," or "I'm overwhelmed by these deadlines," or "I'm worried about this relationship." Precision matters because generalized emotional states keep you stuck while specific identification creates choice. You can't work effectively with bad. You can work with disappointed by examining expectations. You can work with embarrassed by challenging perfectionism. You can work with resentful by establishing boundaries. As you develop this emotional literacy, extend it to physical awareness. Notice how emotions manifest in your body. Anger might appear as jaw tension or heat rising. Anxiety might register as stomach tightness or shallow breathing. Fear might show up as chest constriction or cold extremities. This body-emotion connection provides early warning of shadow activation. When you notice physical tension during a conversation, for instance, you've received valuable information. Your shadow has been triggered. Now you can choose conscious response rather than unconscious reaction. I worked with a physician who prided himself on rationality while dismissing emotions as irrelevant. Yet his shadow emotions emerged in stress-related health problems, conflicts with colleagues, and distance from his family. As he developed emotional literacy, learning to identify and express feelings appropriately, his health improved, his professional relationships became more productive, and his family connections deepened. He didn't become less rational. He became more whole by integrating the emotional intelligence his shadow had contained. The third discipline, triggered awareness. When you experience a disproportionate emotional reaction and ask what's really being triggered here, what old wound has been touched, what disowned part of myself is being activated. Your triggers are treasures. They reveal your shadow's hiding places. When criticism sends you into rage, perhaps your shadow contains the belief that rejection means annihilation. When another's success fills you with envy, perhaps your shadow holds the conviction that life is zero-sum and another's gain means your loss. When a simple mistake provokes intense shame, perhaps your shadow harbors the belief that your worth depends on perfection. Instead of being controlled by these triggers, use them as invitations to self-knowledge. Create a trigger journal. Each time you experience an outsized reaction, record the circumstance, the emotion, and your reflections on the shadow element involved. Over time, patterns emerge. You'll see the same shadow themes appearing in different contexts. And with this awareness comes choice, the ability to respond consciously rather than react compulsively. A business leader I worked with would become disproportionately angry when team members questioned his decisions. Through trigger awareness, he recognized that these reactions stemmed from childhood experiences where questioning authority figures resulted in punishment. His shadow contained both the fear of punishment and the disowned desire to rebel. Once he identified this pattern, he could, when triggered, and remind himself, "This is about my past, not my present. My team member isn't threatening my authority. They're contributing to our success." This simple awareness created space for more productive interactions and ultimately more effective leadership. The fourth discipline, projection retrieval. When you find yourself harshly judging others, ask, where might this quality exist in me? How might I be projecting my disowned aspects onto this person? This isn't about blaming yourself or excusing others' behavior. It's about reclaiming the energy wasted in projection and using it for your own integration. When you project, you give away your power. You attribute to others what exists within you, thereby losing the opportunity to work directly with your own material. You focus on changing them rather than transforming yourself. Projection retrieval reverses this process. It brings your attention back to the only person you can truly change, yourself. It transforms judgment energy into growth energy. I worked with a woman who constantly criticized her husband's emotional unavailability. During our sessions, she gradually recognized how she disowned her own needs for independence and solitude, projecting them onto her husband and then resenting him for embodying them. As she retrieved this projection, acknowledging her own needs for space within the relationship, her resentment diminished. She could now see her husband more clearly, without the distortion of projection, and she could meet her own needs for independence rather than unconsciously relying on him to carry that energy for both of them. This shift transformed their relationship, not because her husband changed, but because she reclaimed a disowned aspect of herself. That's the power of projection retrieval. It changes your relationships by changing your relationship with yourself. The fifth discipline, value-aligned action. Each day identify one action that aligns with your core values, but triggers your shadow resistance. Then do it, not despite the discomfort, but alongside it. Most people wait to feel ready before taking important actions. They delay difficult conversations until they feel confident. They postpone career changes until uncertainty disappears. They avoid healthy habits until motivation magically appears. But this approach has causation backward. You don't feel motivated and then act. You act and then feel motivated. You don't gain confidence and then have the difficult conversation. You have the difficult conversation and then gain confidence. Value-aligned action means choosing behavior based on principles rather than emotional states. It means parenting effectively even when exhausted because you value your children's development. It means addressing problems directly even when uncomfortable because you value integrity. It means maintaining health practices even when inconvenient because you value vitality. Start small. Identify one action daily that aligns with your values, but triggers shadow resistance. Then do it, while feeling the discomfort, acknowledging the fear, noting the avoidance impulse. This practice builds the most essential capacity for shadow integration, the ability to function effectively alongside difficult emotions, rather than waiting for them to disappear. A writer I worked with feared criticism so intensely that he never shared his work. His shadow contained both the terror of judgment and the disowned desire for recognition. Through value-aligned action, he began submitting one piece monthly to publications, not because the fear disappeared, but because he valued creative expression more than he feared criticism. Over time, his fear didn't vanish, but his relationship with it transformed. He could create and share alongside his anxiety, rather than waiting for perfect confidence that would never arrive. The result, published work, expanded opportunities, and most importantly, the profound satisfaction of living his values despite his fears. The sixth discipline, conscious conversation. Identify one important discussion you've been avoiding and initiate it this week. Prepare by clarifying your intention, acknowledging your shadow triggers, and committing to presence rather than performance. Most people think communication problems stem from technique. They need better words, smoother delivery, more persuasive arguments. But the deepest communication challenges come from shadow interference. You can't express what you haven't acknowledged in yourself. You can't listen fully while defending against disowned aspects of your experience. Conscious conversation means communicating from wholeness rather than fragmentation. It means speaking truth without aggression and listening without defensiveness. It means staying present with discomfort rather than retreating into familiar shadow patterns of people-pleasing, dominating, intellectualizing, or withdrawing. Begin with preparation. Before an important conversation, reflect what shadow elements might get triggered. What disowned parts of myself might this discussion activate? What outcome am I seeking beyond just being right or comfortable? Then during the conversation, practice presence. Notice when you start mentally rehearsing rebuttals instead of listening. Observe when emotional intensity signals shadow activation. Acknowledge when you're tempted to withdraw, attack, or manipulate rather than communicate authentically. A couple I counseled transformed their relationship through this discipline. After years of the same circular arguments, they learned to recognize when shadow elements hijacked their communication. The husband would notice his shutdown response stemming from childhood experiences where emotional expression brought criticism. The wife would identify her criticism as a shadow strategy to create distance when intimacy triggered abandonment fears. With this awareness, they could interrupt their pattern. And notice I'm shutting down, he would say. I need a moment to stay present. Or she would observe, I'm criticizing to create safety. Can we slow down? These simple acknowledgments transform their conversations from unconscious reenactments to opportunities for growth and connection. The seventh discipline, environment creation. Systematically restructure your physical and social environments to support shadow integration rather than shadow avoidance. Most people underestimate environment's influence on behavior. They try to change through willpower alone while surrounding themselves with cues that trigger old patterns. They attempt growth while remaining in relationships that reinforce limitation. They seek transformation while maintaining routines that entrench the status quo. Start with your physical space. Does it reflect and support who you're becoming, or does it anchor you to who you've been? Are there changes, even small ones, that would remind you of your commitment to shadow integration? One client placed a small mirror on his desk with the question, "What am I avoiding?" written on the frame. This simple environmental cue prompted regular self-reflection during his workday, gradually shifting his pattern of burying himself in tasks to avoid addressing team conflicts. Next, examine your information environment. Do your reading, viewing, and listening choices reinforce shadow integration or shadow avoidance? Do they challenge you toward growth or comfort you in limitation? Do they expand your perspective or confirm existing biases? Many people consume content that consistently reinforces their shadow patterns, seeking only information that confirms their rightness, their victimhood, or their helplessness. Intentionally diversifying your information diet can illuminate shadow aspects previously hidden in confirmation bias. Finally, assess your social environment. Do your closest relationships support your evolution or enable your stagnation? Do they provide safety for authentic expression or reward familiar limitation? Do they challenge your shadow defenses or reinforce them? This isn't about blaming others for your patterns. It's about recognizing that relationships powerfully shape behavior, often unconsciously. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is restructuring relationships that repeatedly activate your shadow without providing space for integration. A woman I worked with realized that certain friendships consistently triggered her people-pleasing shadow. These friends had no malicious intent, but the dynamic reinforced her pattern of self-abandonment. By gradually spending more time with people who appreciated her authenticity and less time in relationships that rewarded her compliance, she created an environment that supported her integration rather than her fragmentation. The eighth discipline, service from wholeness. Use your shadow integration to benefit others by sharing your authentic journey rather than presenting a curated image. Most people believe they must perfect themselves before contributing meaningfully to others. They think they should eliminate all flaws before assuming leadership positions, resolve all emotional issues before entering relationships, achieve complete clarity before offering guidance. But this approach keeps both you and others trapped in illusion. Your greatest service comes not from projected perfection, but from integrated authenticity. Not from hiding your struggles, but from transforming them into wisdom. Not from denying your shadows, but from demonstrating how to work consciously with them. When you share only your polished successes, you offer others an impossible standard that reinforces their own shadow suppression. When you share your integrated journey, your challenges alongside your victories, your continuing growth alongside your genuine wisdom, you give others permission to acknowledge their wholeness. A business leader I worked with transformed his company culture, not by projecting flawlessness, but by modeling integration. He openly discussed his struggle with perfectionism and how it had both driven success and created unnecessary suffering. By acknowledging this shadow aspect, he gave his team implicit permission to work with their own shadows, creating an environment of psychological safety that improved both performance and well-being. Your shadow work isn't just personal development, it's a contribution to collective consciousness. Each person who commits to integration creates ripples that affect countless others. Each individual who chooses awareness over avoidance adds to humanity's capacity for conscious choice rather than compulsive reaction. These 8 disciplines, practiced consistently, imperfectly, with self-compassion, gradually transform your relationship with your shadow from unconscious avoidance to conscious integration. They don't eliminate difficulty, they don't guarantee constant happiness, but they create something far more valuable, wholeness. And wholeness is the foundation for extraordinary achievement, not the brittle success that comes from drivenness, perfectionism, or external validation, but the sustainable excellence that emerges from integration, authenticity, and purpose.